wind up.
That's right.
And he went on for us.
I remember his set actually. Yeah, you got everybody singing outside. I know you probably didn't hear that.
What was that?
He had everybody singing.
Oh, yeah.
Simple little blues.
Yeah.
And it was such a beautiful afternoon, and everybody was singing. It was like an evening hymn. It was really nice.
Yeah, he's really a nice gentleman.
Oh yes, he is. So I'm just going to see if this thing works. This is borrowed from the BBC.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm planning to do is a series of programs on the jazz guitar.
Mm-hmm.
I should say that I expressed my interest. I'm a guitar player as well.
Okay.
Of lesser reputation than yourself.
Yeah.
But I plan to do a series of 13 programs on the history and the development of jazz guitar. And this will be for the BBC World Service. Are you familiar with the BBC World Service?
No, honestly.
It's a bit like the Voice of America.
I see.
Most people don't hear it in this country, but then you get letters from Kuala Lumpur asking what the second record was, this sort of thing. So it's heard all over the world, in fact.
Great.
And they have a very nice open policy there. And most of the things I put to them, they say yes to, to my surprise.
Yeah.
In fact,
Congratulations.
well, it always surprises me. I always think, when's this going to end?
Yeah.
You know? But first of all, let me just say that one of the programs I want to devote to you and your playing, and I wanted just to ask you a few questions, quite general questions. So one or two things have always intrigued me, and I've been listening to your records for a long time, since somebody introduced me to your playing way back when I was beginning to get into guitar. I've always enjoyed it very much.
Thank you.
It's often in the record sleeve notes they say, oh yes, Tal was very much influenced by Charlie Christian. I wanted to ask you about that because, to be quite honest, I don't hear a great deal of Charlie Christian in your playing. And I just wondered who your influences were in your sort of formative years.
Well, Charlie, and certainly not to not to say less than a lot about his great playing. Was he happened to be the only one who was playing an electric guitar at the time, when I heard him, and that was because I was sort of in a remote area of the country and pretty far away from any direct jazz. I couldn't hear that. I didn't know anything about it anyway, but Charlie Christian happened to be with one of the most popular bands in the country, Benny Goodman. So I heard him, as did many millions of other people, fairly regular, and it was. I'm sure that being a youngster, maybe 17 years old, that hearing an electric guitar, was, it had more than say a musical appeal, because I could play the guitar at that time, but this was the first time it was up front with the saxes and trumpets, so it gave it a whole new role and a new way of playing it as far as I could tell, and single line playing and playing along with the horns, and that certainly that was an influence. Of course, by the time I had made records, I had been listening to others, because Charlie died right after I was aware of his existence, and unfortunately, I think he was only about 22 or 23 years old when he died. So then I began to, I was aware that he was playing in the style of Lester Young, the bassist tenor man, and of course I started listening to Lester because he was still available, and I did, and I used to memorize his choruses off of Basie records like I had memorized Charlie's off of Benny Goodman's record. So, and then that was another influence, of course, and I heard Art Tatum, who sort of turned me on to intricate harmonies for those times, it's very, as it still is, but and then later, we're talking probably about, in the early 40s, 45 when I first heard Charlie Parker, and then I started getting interested in bebop, and I was interested particularly in Bud Powell. It seemed that his style of playing was almost made to measure for guitars, single lines primarily, and bebop phrasing.
Yes.
And I know Jimmy Rainey also had that thought before we ever met, and there was some similarity, I think, in the way we played, which we sort of were when we sat down and played together for the first time ever. We were sort of startled to hear each other playing some of the same things.
Yes.
But I think it just came from having mutually influenced by the same guys.
Yeah. That's interesting. And what you were saying about Art Tatum interested me as well, because I wanted to ask you about that, because it, in a sense, the kind of your harmonic approach to the guitar, I would find difficult to trace back to other guitar players. Certainly, obviously, there were people like George Van Epps who were very advanced harmonically.
Yeah.
But the way you were approaching it seemed to be different from.
Well, of course, I wasn't able to do anything much that would remind anybody of Art Tatum, because there's so much quantity-wise, that he played. But you see, at that time, I was hearing the songs that have now become our standards, but they were like pop tunes then, in that they were just new, and they were on the radio a lot, and people heard them all the time. And of course, when I heard Art Tatum would play the same songs, and I would right away notice the difference between his interpretation of the harmonies and what supposedly, I guess, was more like the composer intended, and that's, I was certainly aware of that, and I set about trying to find out what he was doing, and
were you entirely self-taught at that stage, or did you study with anybody, or composition or harmony? Or
no, there was nobody in that I knew of anyway in that area of the United States. That I was in North Carolina.
Yes.
I was not really. I couldn't tell you where the line between jazz and non-jazz went.
Yes.
It's still a little vague.
Certainly. Yes. Yeah. And you also, you developed quite a few techniques in the guitar. Actually, playing with your thumb, in a sense, predated Wes Montgomery, who, of course, played exclusively with his thumb. But if you mention thumb, people say, yes, Wes Montgomery.
Yeah.
But in fact, you were playing with your thumb quite a lot, even in the 50s, on the recordings in the 50s.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure Wes was. I know he was playing, but I didn't know of him then. He was not too far from my age, I think. He's a little younger, perhaps.
Yes.
But he. I think he just naturally played with his thumb. There's another one, like Charlie Christian. I didn't get there in time to meet him, I would have met him, I think, in about a week or 2 weeks when he died just before a Newport festival that we were both booked on. So, anyway, but how I got to play in that way was on account of Red Mitchell, who used to play the guitar with his thumb, because he, that's the same relative, the same notes as the bass, the lower notes, and he I think when he was sort of laid up with an illness for a while, that he had a guitar that he was more convenient for him to play than the bass, and somebody gave him a guitar and he started playing like that. And later, when he replaced Mingus with the Red Norvo, we would sometimes on the day off or in the afternoons we would jam at my house or someplace, and he would maybe pick up the guitar and started playing that way. And he was also deep into Lester Young and that style, very melodic Inventions, and it really knocked me out the way it came out, and so I started right away doing it with the trio, as you know, as just a little an attempt to get another color out of the groove.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that Red Mitchell played guitar, or that it was such an influence either.
It was funny. He could only play one chord, though.
I'm sure it was a good one.
C major 7th.
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's, what was it? I don't know. It was a major 7th, but he used to laugh about it. He'd play all this. He was just very accurate as could be with the single string stuff, and then he would play the chord.
That's great. On the subject of colours on the guitar, there are other aspects of your playing which I think are noted for introducing different colours, and one of them is your octave harmonic playing.
Yeah.
Now, I mean that's great, that's wonderful. But when I heard you last year, I'm sure I heard you at a place called the Half Moon in Putney.
Uh-huh.
And did you know, incidentally, just along the road from there, 2 roads along, there's a road called Farlow Road.
No, I didn't know that.
I always wanted to tell you that, so now I've told you that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But I'm sure you were doing double octave harmonics.
You mean another octave?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Well, yeah.
And getting them to sound very clear, like a bell.
That takes a little, some attention.
Yeah,
as you go higher, the margin for error. It's what I'm doing, and to make it go up one octave, I divide the effective length of the string in half by deadening it with my first finger of the right hand. Now I'm picking with the plectrum between the thumb and the second finger, middle finger, and stopping it from vibrating. So that forces it to vibrate on either side of the node, which is I think what you call the stationary part of the string then. And so if you will seek out the 1/4, which would be halfway between that point and the bridge, if you can find that, and you have to use landmarks, I think, a little bit, like somewhere around that other pickup.
Yes.
It'll go up another octave.
It's great. Yeah, it's a wonderful sound, that, actually. But I tried it. I thought, wow, let's try this. And occasionally found it, but to try and move it around, I found it really hard to get it coming out clear.
I think, Charles, the thing is that you don't have to look at your left hand, so you can really look at your right hand, and especially if you don't go higher than, say, a C on the first string or D flat, there's the frets up there. At least on my guitar, they go up about that far to the end of the fingerboard.
Yeah.
So just sort of mentally see where you would be playing actually, an octave up from where you are fingering them, and stop the strings at those points, because that moves around as your fingering moves.
And did those techniques just come out of experimentation on your part?
Yeah, that was
a long time ago.
It was something that I could do, but I don't think that I ever bothered playing a melody or anything with it. Maybe put a couple of notes on the end of a song or something. But with Red Norvo, he had one of his things that he did that was special was to play with 6 mallets. So he had 2 fists full of mallets, and he would play chords. And on some ballads, and I would play the melody there, which is sort of strange. It was very much up in the treble end of everything.
Yeah. There's, it's always said in the articles that one reads and on the liner notes that when you started playing with Red Norvo, Red played at such a tempo that you had to really practice hard to get up to that tempo. I just wondered if you could perhaps expand on that. Is that the case?
Yes, yeah, that's right. In fact, I had seen Red maybe a year or 2 years before I joined him. He was with Woody Herman, and he was featured on the stage with a couple of arrangements with songs like "I Surrender Dear" and "The Man I Love," and which he would play in like three different tempos. First would be a ballad, like they were written, and then it would be sort of a bounce tempo or a swing tempo, and then it went like, it just went real fast, And so he wanted to play those arrangements, and I remembered seeing him do them, but the unfortunate thing was I had a problem keeping up with him, it just was such a ridiculous fast tempo. So first thing I did was to find some phrases and not to think about the quality of them so much as the musical value of them, is just to get something happening. And I was pretty, it was probably, very dumb things, but they were fast, and then I just gradually got into playing, and just, it's a state of mind, I think. And this, of course, there's a lot of hammering on and pulling off too, and it just sort of evolved, I think.
Yes. And
I don't, as well as I remember, it didn't take very long, and I really was not, anything but fast then. I'd never have been required to do that.
Yes, yeah. And what's interesting about what you were saying was you didn't mention sort of more formal practice of scales and arpeggios. You were practicing lines rather than doing the more sort of formal exercises. Is that
I never did those things. I probably, it would be as hard for me to play a scale as almost anything else you could do. I can do it, but I didn't arrive at being able to play a scale that way. I mean, it's just that I can, most things that I can hear, I can play reasonably, and it just, it was never seemed convenient for me to take lessons or anything, and especially when I started, it was impossible. So I just worked out fingerings by finding the notes, and of course I recognized right away that jazz players were playing on patterns, because the things that you play on the guitar really make a pretty, it's graphic. It makes a picture, and that's pretty much the way that I think of the fingerboard and everything, because looking at notes doesn't have too much meaning to me.
So it's very visual.
Yes. I think so. I think it's valuable probably for anyone, because especially if you're improvising, because you're working in chord patterns, which say if you want to maybe not want to play that tune in the same key or something, your process is still valid, right? I mean, you just move the pictures.
Yes. Your approach to chord melody playing has always fascinated me as well, and that seems like it's a particular area of guitar playing that most people find quite a difficult one to become fluent on. And just wondered, if that again came from Art Tatum, or that was something that you particularly concentrated on.
Well, the way that I'm doing it now is partially because it's the way that the business has worked out. It's that the way that I work, and I'm traveling around and working probably with a different bassist and drummer every night, and you don't have any time to organize anything, and usually I have a bass book, which has just the basic chords written down in it, and this is in case that there's something that the bass player doesn't know, but I play also by to stay in step with what is the pattern now is the standard tunes and the bebop tunes and the figures on blues and 32 bar things, rhythm tunes, and so that means that I'm the only chord instrument, because I used to play a lot with, say, piano and bass, and I recorded quite a bit with piano and bass. And at that time I was thinking, sort of visualizing playing a horn and playing largely single note things. And now, because just having the bass, sometimes just a bass or bass and drums, and I'm aware that the listener's not hearing much in the way of harmony, and I really don't know how important that is, but it seems to me that somebody should be furnishing some harmony. So I just sort of got into the business of playing part of it in chords. And I don't know that the other guitarists play that way quite as much as I do now. But this only has been happening in two or 3 years.
I think Barney does quite a lot like that.
Yeah.
In fact, do you know he's in London this weekend? Do you know that?
Yes, yeah.
On Sunday, yeah.
Yeah. Well, occasionally I've worked with Barney, and sometimes with Barney and Herb, and last time I played with Barney and Emily Remler, this was a little over a year ago, and I haven't seen him since. I'd like to see him.
Yeah, Emily Remler's a fine player,
isn't she?
Yes,
yeah.
I heard her with Larry Coryell last year.
Well, I think this was just before she and Larry got together. She had been working mostly solo, which she does real well. Just gets up there alone and plays.
Yeah, she's got a lovely bass note and chord style.
Yeah.
Really bounces along.
Really? Yeah, I was really impressed. But I first met her in 1978 when Herb Ellis brought her along to the Concord Festival in California, and I think she wasn't even 20 years old then. So,
gosh. Yeah.
And then I didn't hear from her. I mean, I didn't hear her music for I guess 4 or 5 years. And then she was writing and doing things like that. She's very good.
Are there any other guitar players of her generation, or perhaps slightly older generation, whom you would single out as being particularly interesting for you?
Well, I've heard several. There's Peter Sprague and Bruce Forman are two guys from San Diego and San Francisco area, and there's a young fella in Toronto who plays real good named Lorne Lofsky. I've met some people here that heard of him because Oscar Peterson produced a record, a Pablo record for Norman Granz featuring Lorne, and he's really a sort of I would maybe Ed Bickert style. I think he studied with Ed, but that kind of approach, and he's a good friend of mine, and I see him every once in a while. Sometimes when he comes to New York, he sits in if I'm working a gig, and we got 2 guitars. But I remember, I think when I first met him, or maybe the second time I saw him, I was working in Toronto, and he was working also there. He was, I think, in a group that was backing up Bud Shank at Bourbon Street. And he had a brand new guitar in which he had added a low string and a high string. He had 8 strings, because the Van Epps and Bucky Fitzgerald crowd had a low 7th string, and then Lenny Breau, and I don't know if anybody else did that, but added one at the top. Each one had 7 strings, but he added one on both sides, and I remember asking him if, I even forgot what notes they were tuned to, but I asked him, I said, isn't that a little difficult to just suddenly take an 8-string guitar when you've been playing, a regular guitar? And he said, well, sometimes, he said, when I get confused, I just drop back and play the inside 6.
That's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really? Yes.
But I don't know if he still plays that 8-string guitar. Of course, when he comes to New York, he's got a Stratocaster or a Telecaster.
Yeah. And Lenny Breau is a very fine player who's featured in the film.
Yeah.
Tal Farlow.
Right. Yeah.
And a player, I think, I always feel never really quite got the recognition that he deserved.
Right.
But I always remember that in that film, the encounter between both of you, when you were actually examining his, looking at his technique on artificial harmonics mixed with notes.
Well, I had a record of Lenny's, but that was not for movie making. That was the real fact that he came to my house. Well, they had planned it, you see, and they filmed it. And he came and knocked on my door, and I invited him in, and we sat down and played. They filmed the whole thing. And I had admired, what I heard on the record, which I listened to a lot, and wasn't able to figure out some of the things he was doing. Like as you know, playing close intervals on the guitar can be out of the question sometimes because of the stretch involved. Well, he wasn't stretching at all. He was just dropping a harmonic in between what was basically a regular guitar chord. He would raise, say the note was on the 5th string up an octave, and it would be right in between maybe a second or minor second away from another note in there. And I think that kind of a sound always gets your attention when you hear it on a guitar, because you know it's almost impossible to do. Well, maybe by playing an open string somewhere, but that gives you very little choice. You have to do it in a certain position. But he could just take a series of chords, say a chord melody, and it was just like the piano, very clusters almost, And that's why I couldn't figure out how he was doing it. But he was a master at doing that, at playing a full chord, but he picked with his fingers, nails and a thumb pick. But he could just make that harmonic fit in with the rest of the notes, and it just was very even, and
yeah, very talented player.
Another guy who can do that real well is Ted Greene. Whom I met about a year ago in California. He doesn't play outside hardly ever. At clubs or anything. He teaches and he writes books, and he stopped in to see me and introduced himself. And of course, I had one of my students gave me a tape of his record that he made. I think he only made one. You know who I'm talking about?
Oh, I know, yes.
Okay.
Modern chord progressions.
Yeah, I guess he's well known for his books.
Chord chemistry, yeah.
Chord chemistry.
Yeah. I've never heard him play.
Oh, no?
No, but a friend of mine has, and said he was a fantastic player.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think most people are reminded of Lenny, but he's a real expert on George Van Epps, and he was a student of George's. And he just plays. He's just a complete guitarist, And I was I was impressed that he did not use a lot of the beboppers or jazzman kind of harmonies. Often they do go unpredictable places and have a pretty far out sound to me. And I asked him about it, and he told me that he, since he was a kid, he liked to go to the movies, and he was listening to the scores of the movies, And I think a lot of the movie writers are classically trained. I think and that, not thinking in so much terms of 1, 6, 2, 5,
yes,
always, and going unexpected places with the harmonies or modulations.
That's interesting, though. Yes, more orchestral approach to guitar harmony. Yeah. Lastly, can I just turn to your other interest, because I know that you're also you've got a technical interest in aspects of the guitar. The actual hardware of guitar and electronics. I know you've invented quite a number of things and developed some electronics for the guitar, and also in fact designed a guitar for Gibson.
Yeah. Well, I've sort of been, mechanical minded and to a certain point electronic, but just strictly on hobby level. I can't get into the mathematics, get sort of involved, and so when I build a project or something that's, it's like cutting and trying resistors and capacitors and things like that, or going by often adapting a circuit for that had seemingly no place in music, which is the basis for a frequency divider or an octave thing, which I sort of put together a long time ago. I wasn't the first even to use it, in music. But, it's a simple thing that it's a divide by two device, which is basic to all calculators and computers, and it just eliminates every other cycle. So, but the problems that you have with the guitar are that you're going to have to filter out the harmonics that are natural to the string, in that case, and also you have to try to devise some way to sustain the note long enough that it provides a suitable signal to trigger the.
So, Tal, can you just tell us a little bit about the concept behind the Tal Farlow Gibson guitar?
It was the idea, I think, was Gibson's, and I was one of a group of players that they were going to have guitars made and named for, and that was Barney Kessel, and Howard Roberts had one, Johnny Smith had one, and Trini Lopez had one at the same time. That I remember those were the advertising in their Gibson ads at the time, and I'm speaking about 1962. For 5 years they made it, and I understand that there's approximately 250 of them were made in the 5-year period. So now I guess one in fair condition would be a collector's item.
Sure.
And there's nothing really unusual about it. It's basically a ES350 in size and the way it feels. And I made that request of them because I had been playing a 350, and I've been going back in around 1950, I think, when I was first with Red. I had a Gibson guitar that I bought from a fellow in North Carolina, and he was going in the Army, and he just wanted to sell it, and it was too good of a deal to let somebody else get, so I bought it from him and just sort of put it away because I was playing a Gretsch at that time, and so then I decided I wanted to try to play the Gibson, but it had a very wide fingerboard on it, and it was in appearance it looked something like what they call the Charlie Christian model, but it was sort of a one step more deluxe than the 150 at that time was. Those numbers were a rough idea of what they cost at the time in dollars. So a 150 went for $150. Which tells you how long ago I'm talking about. Anyway, so mine must have been maybe a $200 or something like, or a ES200 or maybe 250. It was a lot larger, and I think on the Charlie Christian model, the back of it was flat, and mine was carved and everything. But it had that same kind of a pickup, basically. And so a friend of mine in Philadelphia said he could trim that neck down. It was really wide, and I was used to the very slim neck that was on the Gretsch, and I just couldn't manage that. And there was also like a ridge. The cross section of the neck was almost triangular with a point at the back, and I had that trimmed down, and the fellow did a real good job on it. But then it needed a fingerboard. Frets. And there was a man in California who everybody said, you got to get this man to do it. His name was Milt Owen, and all of Barney and all those guys he could do no wrong. You know, he did their work so good. So I went to him and I told him I wanted him to make it 1 fret shorter. You know, eliminate the first fret, and then move the bridge up a corresponding distance towards the nut. You know, it'd be in effect like putting a capo on the first fret and tuning it down a half tone, right? I mean, if you put a capo on the first fret, it'll go up a half tone. Now, if you tune it down, your second fret is now, if you call that the first fret and start from the nut with that, you will gain. The point of the thing was that you would, if you take off 1 at the first fret, you gain 2 at the octave, right? See? Because then, I could reach. It wasn't cutaway, you understand? But I could still reach up to A and B flat easily, because it now, instead of hitting at the 14th fret, it hit around the 16th. You know. So if you look at the pictures of that, you can see that marking where the octave is, the 12th fret, is a different position than where it was before, and then it had to notch out the pick guard because the bridge was moved up. You couldn't do that with a guitar that has 2 pickups on it, because the bridge would come where the second pickup is. However, and naturally that will make your strings will be of tension will be that of a guitar that's 2 1/2 tone flat for the same strings, and I think that probably had some slight maybe effect on the sound. The tension being less, but the real but some people said that I was, with my large hands, to get a short scale fingerboard was carrying coals to Newcastle.
Yes. It's cheating.
Yeah.
Yes. No, sorry, it slipped my mind. There was a particular question I wanted to ask you on that. Slipped me. I'll probably come back to it. What about amplification? You seem to me you always had a particular, I would call it a kind of woody sound. You got a very recognisable sound. Was some of that due to amplification as well as we've discussed, to the guitar, perhaps a slight tension in the pickup?
I would imagine it's probably the way that I have the tone controls on the amplifier and the guitar adjusted. I don't know.
Yes, I never know about these things.
It's to me, they said like every record sounds different. I mean, the sound of the guitar and each of them. But you see, back in say around the time I was first recording for Norman Granz, which is about maybe 54, along there somewhere, they did not take the signal directly from the guitar as they did a few years later. They just mic'd the amplifier. And I used to have, disagreements with the engineers, because I would adjust the amplifier from the way it sounded where I was. However, they would, and I guess rightly, put the microphone right in front of the speaker. Now, it's got to sound different there, other than being louder, it's got to, because, for a number of reasons. But they have to do that in order to, to be able to balance the group. And so I don't know. Just
one final question, Tal, and that's the other interest of yours, which is quite famous, which is sign writing.
yeah.
Which is
Well, see, that's what I was doing when I first was involved in playing. I mean, I've been playing since I was in school, and you know, first with an instrument that my dad made out of an old mandolin, and he strung it up to be tuned like a ukulele, or the first relatively same as the top four strings of the guitar, and I learned to play chord melodies on those four strings, and slow tunes and things like that. But then when I grew up and got these long fingers and started to play the guitar, I was not familiar with six-string chords, but I had this this long thumb, so and I've used I note the fifth string as well as the sixth with my thumb a lot, so it might have something to do with the fact that I sort of learned it in two different, familiarized myself with the fingerboards when there was only four strings on it, and then had to go back and add the other two later. That's really a strange way to go about it.
I actually, funny enough, I had the same history. I actually had a little ukulele, and I learnt all the chords and guitar for my 14th birthday, and worked out all the chords. Just the basic chords.
Well, so and then you had the same.
Well, unfortunately, my thumb doesn't go around to the fifth.
Well, I know, but you had to learn.
I had to learn those bottom two strings. Just to have to count the strings. There were so many.
Yeah. Well, I think that I'm just now thinking that probably I don't make many bar chords. It's just not natural for me to make bar chords. Except maybe three strings on the same fret or something like that. But as far as getting a six-string bar, I can't do that. I can't get all the notes to sound clear.
Yes.
And
it's funny. I mean, because there's all the sort of rules of guitar playing, aren't there? Mustn't bring your thumb around,
I know.
And you do it.
Well, I see many strange ways of playing the instrument. There's a guy that he's a good friend of Les Paul's, a fellow named Thumbs Carlisle. I don't think I ever heard him, but Red Norvo told me a story that I don't think. I don't know if I buy it or not. They said that when he was a kid, his sister was a guitarist, and she had a guitar, and she thought he was too young and not with enough responsibility to be trusted with her guitar, especially when she wasn't there. So she had a case, and she put it on the top shelf in a closet, and he wanted to play it, and he would stand on the chair and reach up and open the case and just reach inside with it still in the case. And that's how he got that way of fingering, by just laying the guitar down in his lap and playing it like a steel guitar.
True.
That's the story I got from Red.
So there's so many ways of playing the guitar.
Like Stanley Jordan is the new example of that.
Yes.
Something like that technique, I guess.
Yes.
Because, touch system, which I think a fellow named Emmett Chapman made an instrument called the stick, and that using that same approach, that you just tap the strings and use the amplification.
There's a technique that's used a lot in rock music now, isn't it?
I see. You go into a music store and you see guys sitting around playing with both hands and getting all these strange, real fast things happening. Yeah.
Tal, thank you very much indeed. That's been great. It's been really nice to talk to you. I enjoyed it a lot, actually.
Oh, nice to be with you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Let's see if we can stop this machine. It's a mighty weird machine, this.